Welcome to Hard Software, where we journey into the untamed world of software for real-life, complex scenarios. Today, we track Manish Sinha, co-founder of Cadbury, as he fearlessly navigates the dense jungle of data migrations and complex onboarding. The task is Herculean and the data untamable, but our hero is relentless in his pursuit of order.
I think we catch you at a very opportune time because you just launched Cadbury, which I'm super excited about. And you were saying it's been an interesting 72 hours.
Yes.
How are things going?
Let's see. With beer in hand, I need to take a swig before I answer this question. It's been a wild 72 hours, Antonio. One thing I lean into a lot is thinking in public, writing in public, and building in public to a degree.
Yeah.
And when we dropped this video on Tuesday, 3 days ago, I put it out there to just excite attention, get the conversation going, build a dialogue. And what happened is a deluge of DMs and emails from consultants across the spectrum, NetSuite, Salesforce, a little bit of SAP.
Yeah.
And they were all like, I have war stories for you, Manish. I have battle scars on my body from the hours I've spent doing the work that you're trying to make easier. And that made us feel so just warm and fuzzy, like we got to commercialize and build a business, blah, blah, blah. But it just gave us this fulfillment that there's a human cost to all of these current processes that we have an opportunity and privilege to solve. So it's been fun, a little bleary-eyed, but overall fun.
That's awesome. I saw the video and I think I immediately told Uba, we have to have a conversation about this because I was so excited. Not just from my perspective, in a very selfish way. I was like, oh, I wish we had this almost as a service for when we were building Silo. I'm really curious to give people a little bit of background. What is the origin of Cadbury? What is the problem and why did you decide to solve this problem?
Yeah. The problem is that implementations for tools like SAP and Salesforce and NetSuite take a lot of time and they cost a lot of money. And that's what we're focused on. But rewinding back a little bit, I worked in Morgan Stanley for a couple of years. I used to live in New York City and I served the FP&A team there. Yeah. And we would have to integrate with different databases, IBM DB2, and also build on top of Anaplan, which is a very well-known, prominent FP&A tool. And that was my first taste and glimmer of these legacy incumbent products and how they think about onboarding, which is, by the way, very minimally. We're talking like SOAP XML in the docs, if the docs exist. It's just a different, they think there's not a lot of emphasis on care around how you get a user into and onto a system. Yeah. There is more emphasis on how that user is treated once they're live and on the system. And so that was my first exposure to onboarding and kind of what's missing for that category of tools. Yeah. And as I grew up and as I became a professional engineer and used the same tools that you do, I got to experience what a beautiful onboarding is like. Stripe. I love creating an account and it's a smooth wizard and a beautiful UI. And I went from, you remember authorize.net, here we're at a place where we create an account and we can start serving paying customers. Amazing. Yeah. And what that taught me is that the sooner you can deliver value to somebody, whether you're selling a banana or selling software, you will please them a lot. And side note there, I used to run a fantasy sports real money gaming product. And the quicker we paid our users and payouts, our NPS ratings just shot off the roof.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And when we minimize those payout times, it happens. So I came to, like, all this culminated in March and April of this year, where we didn't start with this problem, by the way. I had it in the back of my head, but we started studying FP&A tools,
Yeah.
ERP tools, inventory planning tools. And my co-founder and I, we were just going through it, doing the same things you did, listening to customers, trying to see if there's a commercial opportunity here. And one day I sat back, I'm like, wait a second. In each of these waypoints in our journey, we heard it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to even start using this tool. And everybody who we surveyed said, this is just a matter of fact. It is the law of physics in this sort of type of industry and software. They just take a lot of time to do.
Yeah.
And I wanted to question that. I wanted to interrogate it. And that has led and is continuing on with this journey behind Cadbury.
That's awesome. I feel like companies miss out on time to value. And it's exactly what you were describing before, right? It's like the texture of the product matters a lot. And a lot of companies have not put in enough effort to understand how to get a customer to success. Instead, they're thinking, okay, what happens after they go live? And speaking of Stripe, we just integrated Stripe into our product. And I had never done it in such a smooth way. Granted, the last time I used Stripe was like back at Silo a few years ago. And it completely caught me by surprise because we just embedded a bunch of components and it's like done.
Yeah.
That is super interesting. Do you feel like you carried over? I mean, it seems like in your past experiences, you've suffered this not just as a builder, but also as a user of these tools. And I feel like you almost feel it worse as a user than as a builder because you're so in it every day. It seems like you guys are starting with the QuickBooks to NetSuite problem.
That's right. And in talking to several consultants, shadowing them, embedding with them, over and over, we've heard that the pain point starts with data migrations. And within that, a very common path that it shows itself in are people moving from QuickBooks to NetSuite. Very common SMB to mid-market sort of path. You saw it at Silo, I'm sure. And so that's where we've, you're a multi-time founder. I know you think a lot about what is that minimal viable problem and what is my entry point? And these are questions we're asking ourselves all the time. And the early take here is that it's people moving from QuickBooks to NetSuite, and specifically with data migrations.
I think it makes total sense. I was describing to you before this process we had at Silo where a lot of our customers were coming from QuickBooks. We wanted to migrate over their accounting. And so that's why when I saw in your demo this thought of like bringing over your chart of accounts, which is one of the most important things because everything you do after that is influenced by how you designed your chart of accounts. Granted, you can modify it later, but you maybe shouldn't, or like not as much. It's not as movable as other data types. And I thought it was really interesting because I feel like, at Silo, we had a whole team of people whose job was to do implementations. And part of that implementation was bringing over the chart of accounts from QuickBooks to Silo because we had a full ledger. Problem is our implementation managers were not accountants. So they didn't have the knowledge to basically make decisions on the chart of accounts like, oh, we should merge this or we should split this into two separate accounts. And so I think I mentioned to Upal a couple of times, like, I wish we had this as a service to like embed inside of Silo. And I was really excited because QuickBooks to NetSuite is both, in a very odd way, it's both a very narrow but very painful problem. And it's also something that generally only companies that are growing will experience, right? Just because of the nature of the product. If you're going from QuickBooks to NetSuite, things must be going well.
Right.
And so that got me really excited because I feel like even from a market positioning standpoint, it like makes total sense. What are the challenges? I know.
Can I pull one thread there?
Of course,
It's actually relates to the question you're about to ask, this challenge. You talked about at Silo, you had an integration team, and some of the decisions that were to be involved were almost like outside of their scope or above their pay grade. And that kind of weaves into the problem and the opportunity, and also a challenge as well. The drum that I beat with Cadbury and with spaces that frankly, you and I and all of us are kind of occupying, is that the problem is not moving a bit A to a bit from destination A to destination B. It's the problem is moving it over, or deciding whether to move it over, when to move it over, what kind of business you are to determine whether to move it over, what kind of industry you're part of. All of these different if conditions determine whether you should move that bit from this place to that place. And so when I think about the future of ETL, I'm kind of starting to arrive to a point where like ETL is kind of a solved problem. What isn't solved is if you were to take that pipe and put in this new pipe that says business, that feeds business information, context, data, and almost have a multiplexer in where those pipes intersect, and be like, well, should we move this over, or should we massage it this way or that way based upon how the business is? And so that's an opportunity and a challenge for us, because there's a lot of different cases.
Yeah.
Like if you're a manufacturing company and you're in this particular state, that may impact what sort of tax account to move over or to create. So there's a lot of nuances and edge cases. And where I get excited about this is that LLMs are that catch-all technology to find those. So that's kind of the approach and mindset we've been going with into this.
I think it makes total sense. Because and actually, this is a great segue. Let's talk about fixing onboarding, especially complex onboardings. Yeah. Is the issue gathering tribal knowledge in order to do the onboarding? Or because there seems to be two entirely different layers, right? One is, let's migrate your data over, which from, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, right? But from a table stakes perspective, on paper, it's just a mapper. Right? Let's say that you can just map the data and it just magically appears. Right. It seems to me like there is this increasing complexity in how to gather tribal knowledge in order to do that transition. Is that where you think the problem lies, or am I completely off base?
No, you're totally on base. And let me set up a little bit of context here for how a deployment is executed in the current state. You sign at the dotted line for something like NetSuite and QuickBooks. And surprise, you don't get to use it on day one. You need to bring in a team of what are called solutions consultants who help you implement the tool. What does implement mean? It means customizing the tool to fit your business's processes and flows. It means migrating data over it. By the way, it also means training staff, change management, testing. It means all of these things. And these folks help do that work. And how a typical engagement works, kind of getting back to your question, is the beginning piece is devoted to knowledge capture. They will come sometimes on site and almost go through your books in a way. They want to understand how your business works, document the key processes and flows. How does a PO get approved? Things like that.
Yeah.
And that knowledge capture is equal parts in a person's head, but also embedded and encoded in their legacy systems, in their spreadsheets, in their documentation. And so there's a bet for us to make that, and to be clear, we're not focusing on automating this piece yet. It's just kind of where our head is going, is that if all this data is there in an unstructured way somewhere, can we at least advance the documentation, the research and documentation of it, so that when the humans meet, and this step will never be automated, nor should it be, but when the consultant and the business owner meet, they have a rich business brief in front of them that documents how their business works, so that they have a jumping off point for like, oh, I see you have this PO approval flow. it could be beneficial to move it up and down this way or cut out this piece. And oh, by the way, we got some suggestions from Cadbury on how to do that. So yes, onboarding has a knowledge capture and a context building piece. Yes, it needs to still, I believe, have humans involved in it because there's a big decision to be made. And also, yes, there's an opportunity to make it a little more efficient.
I love that you are approaching this from the perspective that you still need a human involved. And it seems to me, even from your demo video, what I got from the video is that Cadbury isn't replacing humans. It's elevating the humans doing this job today and giving them a better tool.
Yes.
Because right now, do they have tools at all to make this other than just the two softwares that they're mapping from and to?
There's a couple tools. So there's a lot of consultancies, especially future thinking ones, will create scripts in-house for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. And this will be at kind of the ETL layer, maybe cleaning a set of phone numbers. They can kind of do it very easily. There are tools that operate a little bit in the space. Boomi comes to mind, that does a lot of some of this work. But Antonio, you will be surprised. For the most part, there's a lot of manual labor going on here.
Yeah.
I have, as part of our customer discovery, I have a flow chart for doing an upload currently of any piece of data into NetSuite. And you might think it's Egyptian hieroglyphics if you looked at it, or fan fiction, but it is this very complex kind of workflow and process diagram for uploading data. And to give you an example. If the data you're uploading has a parent and child relationship, the first thing you need to do is upload the children elements, push that all the way through, and then you need to come back to the parent elements, make sure it associates correctly with the children, and then push that through. In a GUI. In a GUI, all manually. And so these are the things that give us inspiration and help. And by the way, the consultants hate this shit, man. They hate it. They know they're working at half pace. They know they're doing unnecessarily work that they've done multiple times in the past. But that is the yearning we're trying to fulfill, is to just be able to move faster and work on true problems that require their attention.
I mean, especially given that it seems like these consultants are highly skilled, like specialized people. And so you wouldn't want them doing manual work. You want them to actually be, it seems to me like with Cadbury, you could become, if you're a consultant doing these sort of implementations, you can become an orchestrator and decision maker, as opposed to, it's like in a very, I don't want to anthropomorphize it, but like in a way, it's like having someone who is doing this work for you that you shouldn't be doing because it's just manual entry.
Yes.
That is so interesting.
In the same way that I use Cursor every day and it's altering the way I program.
Interesting.
Where I'm almost prompting for snippets of code and maybe becoming a shittier engineer in the process, but I'm way more efficient. And honestly, I don't need to know how this framework and library and the nuances of it. Like, I just want the box to show this way. That is an inspiration we take as we're building Cadbury.
I wonder if horse carriage operators felt like they were becoming shittier horse carriage operators when they got an engine instead of a horse.
Yeah.
But then eventually, I mean, that's probably a bad comparison because you're replacing a horse with an engine. But I think it's really interesting, and I feel at the end of the day, I feel that there's this conflation between a lot of companies use the branding of an AI coworker. I don't know. I mean, I feel like when I look at Cadbury or other companies that are thinking more about this as like, it's just a really good tool. And you don't need to necessarily anthropomorphize it and convince me that this is a Android-y person, you know, like it just works and it works really well. And I feel like from the video I got that there's like a series of steps that you have to take. How does Cadbury work? Like, let's go a little bit deeper into it.
Totally.
So how does it work?
We, I'll we take at a high level,
Mm-hmm.
we take inspiration. This is an opinion and belief we hold. We believe the future of these co-pilot assistant sort of workflows, agentic, if you want to use the buzzword,
Mm-hmm.
look a little more like TurboTax and a little less like ChatGPT and Devin. And I think we've maybe even tweeted about this back and forth. Like, we believe if you set an agent free without guardrails or bounds, you don't really know what kind of result you're going to get back, and you can't necessarily trust it. But if you think thoughtfully about a pipeline and you document the stages within the pipeline, and then you figure out where an agent or a piece of software can operate within that stage, that suddenly I think becomes way more interesting. And so just as a design principle, that's something that we think about when building Cadbury.
Yeah.
In terms of how it works, to be clear, the story is still being written. Some early thoughts there, some main modules we're thinking of are there's going to be a big RPA layer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you were amazed at Anthropic's work just as much as we were with the computer use module that they put out. Like, what a time to be alive for people sitting at the app layer. These Lego blocks are appearing in front of us. And that's something we're going to leverage and also create our own RPA layer. But the design principle there is the consultant needs to stay in the loop. They need to be able to intervene when they need to.
Yeah.
And when something goes wrong, there is a almost like a break point for them to jump in on. And so that's how we kind of think about this, automating this sort of mouse click upload file. A lot of these systems don't have any APIs. And so we want to build comfort and ease with these consultants, and RPA is the way to do that. And I'm so thrilled at the kind of advances there. So that's kind of one module. Another module for us is, as part of that demo, we're ingesting all this data from your legacy system, your customers, your vendors, your POs. We're downloading it all. And we're then taking that and using it to train our knowledge base. And we're leaning heavily on LLMs to do this. There's a lot of fun kind of engineering nuances there with, like, how do you take spreadsheet database data and encode it and then make it digestible to an LLM and then interrogate based on that? These are problems that we are solving still every day. But that's a goal, that's a module we want to build, so that you have this person who's educated, this digital person, this thing that's super highly educated about your business, knows exactly what's going on, and has made conclusions from that. And then the consultant can lean upon all that work. And so those are kind of two big modules that we think about is RPA, and then also ingesting data and then training an LLM on top of it.
I thought it was really interesting when explaining how it works that you referred to other solutions where they're essentially creating unfettered access to these agents, right? That they're like free form, as sort of, because I think the way that I've been thinking about it is that those are sort of the first wave. The first wave was unfettered access agents. And it's a little bit that famous viral situation where someone convinced a Chevy dealership's chatbot to give them a 40% discount on their car.
Yeah.
And you are the next wave, which is, no, these are fundamentally statistical abstractions, and they have to be used. And you're thinking about it, how do we feed data into these abstractions so that it can be reasoned and it can be asked questions against, as opposed to, hey, here's a chatbot and it will do some stuff. And maybe you have tool calling. And certainly when you use ChatGPT, there are tool calls under the hood where, like, code analysis and no code analysis and all these things. But I think it's very interesting the way that you describe the Cadbury as, let's call it, a series of components that are weaved together with guardrails to make it more optimal, so to speak.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so. And I'm curious, in building BEM, like, not only are you in this place to maybe deploy some of this technology yourself, but you're working very closely with people who are maybe directly deploying that technology and leaning on BEM for it. Curious what your your take or opinions, if you formed them yet, on like agents and these sort of autonomous pieces of software that do some work for you?
I could talk about this forever. And actually, Jenny, one of our engineers, and I were just brainstorming on this the other day. I don't like the word agents because I think it tries to, again, personify the work that these new abstractions are doing.
Yeah.
I think it's wave. I think it's wave zero, right? Like we first saw a first wave of companies building what I would call very superficial applications of these abstractions, thinking, "Oh, ChatGPT does it as a chat, therefore I should." And if you go on Reddit and you go on like r/artificial or ChatGPT, there's certainly the daily post that will say, but no, but it seems like it reasons, but it seems like it has intelligence of its own.
Right.
When really LLMs are just very good knowledge compressors. And I think that we are now past the hangover of wave zero. There is already like a few hundred companies that have already run out of money and disappeared. It's just that we don't feel it because the bus is still going. But the reality is that a lot of companies have already burned through their money on inference. And there's now the new wave that is learning from this and realizing, oh, it's not about chatbots and it's not about personifying. You need to build some guardrails. And I think it's really interesting. It's like the go to Mars paradox of we have a new technology and suddenly the first thing we think is like, oh my God, humans are getting replaced. We're having, what do they call it? AGI, like artificial general intelligence. And we're having all these things. Well, no, hold on. The bar is this low and you're trying to sell me on something that may be achievable in 2050. Why don't we go there in steps, right? In increments. I feel there is this greed for development, when in reality, I mean, you were mentioning the case of solutions consultants, right? Like the bar is so low. Let's take it to the next notch. And by doing that, we'll find what the next notch will be. And you do iterations as opposed to thinking, oh, the way that people will migrate from QuickBooks to NetSuite is going to be by I don't even need to give it a login. It's just like, it just happens automatically. Like there's so many layers, right?
Yeah.
So I think that,
by the way, and that's why I'm so thrilled that you're doing this podcast series and shining a light on these problems that people don't think about, these problems that live in industries that just for some reason, for whether it's fair or not, don't get the spotlight. Like, I hope you continue to beat the drum that there's so much advancements and progress to make behind the quote unquote curtains of industry.
Yeah, and look, we are all. You were talking about. How did you building in public?
Yeah.
Right, and I think building in public is very interesting. But it so happens that building in public became mainstream just as AI was coming out, and so the two have formed together this like 10x wave of hype.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we started Kite 10 years ago. That was one of the first hype waves of machine learning. And this is like 2014, and everyone was telling themselves, dude, like the next future, the future is machine learning, and look at all the things we can do. And there was this wave of companies that like just like suddenly exploded in like popularity, and then they realized, oh no, like we can only do so much. Let's like take it step by step. And so I think going back to your question, I think that the way I think about it is. Agentic workflows or agents, if we want to personify them, they're just a series of very well-connected components. A lot of the problems that people are trying to solve today with agents can be solved with deterministic traditional software. A lot of these problems are software problems. They're not machine learning problems. I think especially with the advent of RAG, and I think people are conflating RAG with inference with search. Search is a traditional software engineering problem. It's not a problem of inference. And then if you divide it into smaller problems, you can use inference to define how you index search. But you used a very interesting word before, which is breakpoint. And that's the main piece of feedback we get, especially from enterprise prospects. They're all saying the same thing. we want two things. We want breakpoints so that a human in the loop can decide when and where they need to stop it and make decisions. And I want to define my processes in a way that someone in my team who's the orchestrator, right? That's what we want. We want these people to elevate themselves with new tools that we build, and for the manual data entry operator to become an orchestrator. And so they want that, and they want progressive acquisition of tribal knowledge. That's something that a lot of agents don't have today. There's a lot of things being conflated there where people are experimenting a little bit with RAG. I personally think RAG is going to disappear in the next year or two, because I think RAG is not a technology or a paradigm. It's a fix. It's a patch it's a workaround for a technical limitation. And I
specifically the training of the model and the cutoff date of
the cutoff, right? That's the first problem. And then we realize, okay, cool. How do we inject more knowledge into this statistical abstraction? We're just going to shove it in the context window, but we can't shove everything. How do we find first the things to shove? Right. And so I think that that'll slowly disappear. And I just retweeted a couple days ago, this company that is trying to figure out how to store information in disk and access it in disk in a more seamless way that is not necessarily RAG search, shove into context window and ask. And so I think that, to your point, I think it's breakpoints and then acquisition of tribal knowledge. Those are things that matter to you guys as well, right? Sure. You mentioned it yourself. It's the human needs to be able to make decisions when they need to make it. And then you can enable them to make better decisions. Totally. And the other thing that we've heard a lot is there's tribal knowledge. There's a lot of context that goes beyond how you run a business process. Actually, this is a great segue because I wanted to talk to you about BPO. And I feel like there is almost ever since the previous, we're talking 30, 40 years ago, these software companies came up with, actually, it's not software, it's just business, with business process design and management. We have the last 15 years of software with business process design and management. I'm really curious how you think about Cadbury's role in optimizing a business process and business process optimization.
Yeah. And I'll start that with kind of a note from one of the previous anti-ERP meetups that where Wiley presented, and he talked about the story of DOS and how so much of onboarding a new customer to DOS is doing this work. Yeah. And in fact, I think he would say that it's actually the bulk of the work. We know how to sign somebody up to a form and get them into our system, but getting finding their processes and encoding and translating that into DOS world takes time. Yeah. And where I think I totally get that. And I think a lot of those elements are probably here to stay. I think this is a place where I'm still educating myself about, but when I think about understanding a business, I think about looking at its data. I think about talking to its constituencies, its users, its owners. And I think about almost the industry that they're in and the vertical that they're in. And I take these 3 points and I think one has to synthesize them together and be look, there's a very big book full of many chapters that describe this business. Yeah. And by the way, you can have, that same kind of business making the same product maybe next door, and that book will look totally different. And so the questions for people like you and me and even Wiley is that, okay, cool. Every company has its own book. How do we go about, finding that book, understanding it, and then maybe shortening it or maybe remixing it in different ways? And I don't know if I have an answer there. I think there are ways to find the pages in the book quicker. I think there's a way to search through the book quicker and really form that book quicker. But in terms of if I want to change the text on a particular page, if I want my business to work this way versus that way, that's a human process you're impacting.
Yeah.
And what gets lost on a lot of, I think, software engineers is that, like, if I work at Stripe and I adjust a process in my software, I'm probably impacting a digital process. When you change code in this world, in this old, unsexy ERP world, you are impacting people's lives.
Oh,
Okay.
for sure.
You are changing their day-to-day work. And that's a big deal. And so that's the drum that I beat all the time, is that, this problem is bigger than other problems, in that we're understanding and changing things that really change, like, what a person does every day at these companies.
That's very noble, especially thinking about it that way. I feel like it's very noble because I think that at the end of the day, people want better tools. They want to go home to their families a little earlier. I have a few horror stories of things we did right and wrong when we were building Silo. Our users were on their feet 12 hours a day through the night, right? They would start work at 10, 11 p.m. and they would go all the way to like 8 a.m.
Yeah.
And we were a startup and we wanted to move fast and we wanted to break things and then fix them and then break things. And that was not compatible with creating a mission critical piece of software that had to run 24/7 uninterruptedly, and especially one where our surface area was continuous. Like we were their operating system as a business, right? And I have a couple of horror stories of decisions that I personally made about UX where we changed the position of some buttons and people were screaming from the roof saying, like, what are you guys doing? I am typing 1,500 orders every day, and now it's taking me one more minute to fill every single one of them. You're ruining my life. Like, it's pretty crazy, but I mean, I feel like the type of software that you guys are building now, it is a huge responsibility.
Oh yeah. And if I could just put a kind of a face to all of this, this is the family-owned packaging company in the Midwest that's been around for decades, that one day decided, you know what, we've been working on spreadsheets, maybe an old ERP system. We've been doing things this way. The son or the daughter comes in and says, we need to change things. And they look at maybe a new ERP. And what comes out of that, Antonio, is them working a second job and nights and weekends just to make their software better, make their infrastructure better. It's the mentoring nonprofit that just wants to serve its mentees better using Salesforce, but maybe is using Airtable right now, and is instead saddled with this 5-6 figure implementation where they're not figuring out how to advance their noble mission to help the world. They're thinking about how to format phone numbers and move data from one place to another and train their staff on this new software that they're investing so much in that maybe will help them move faster. And so I and my co-founder, we always remind ourselves of that. We have no illusions, and in fact are inspired by the people that we hope to serve one day.
Yeah.
And that starts with these consultants, to be clear. But there's very interesting kind of knock-on, follow-on effects for who we can help. And that extends to the users, and that extends to the products themselves.
Yeah, I feel like it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of building a startup in the Bay Area. But the people using this, they're like, it's not, I mean, I told you before, we're not building the next Tinder.
Yeah.
Right? We're building something that is mission critical, that is going to be used by people that are just like you and I and need tools and actually depend on us, right? Because they don't know, they're experts at something else. They're not experts at this. Right. I think you were making some, you're taking some hints to the future. What do you think is the future of enterprise tooling and onboardings, and how do you guys fit in that world?
I think the future is a world where you can decide you want to use this big piece of software and just use it.
Yeah.
I think there'll so much of this craft and process that we go through today. Not all of it will be automated, but a huge piece will be. And the world we imagine at Cadbury is that these it's three kind of bullet points that I beat the drum on. Number one, these consultancies will be able to capture more margin on each project. They'll be able to grow without hiring. And then point number two is the SaaS products will have better time to value propositions. And point number three is, and the one that we just talked about that I personally care about the most, is that these users can get back to growing their business.
Yeah.
They can get back to serving more kids in their nonprofit. They can go back to shipping more fake Christmas trees, whatever their grind is. And that's like the future we want to bring forward into today. And if I were to take a bet, I think this entire industry is going to change a lot. I think, these solutions consultants will be elevated into like a managerial, almost executive decision-making sort of role where the software is doing so much of the heavy lifting for them. And we're excited about that. I think they are too, because we're all trying to work on problems that are interesting and challenging to us. I think that's not just the mark of a founder. It's the mark of all of us. We all want to like chip away at something really hard during the day and then feel the fulfillment that comes at the end of the day. You felt this when writing code and overcoming a bug. I felt this in that same way. And so if we can bring people to that, I think we're definitely going to make them move faster. But I think there's a level of happiness that comes with that.
I think it makes total sense. Especially we live in a market where we live in a very privileged situation where we could choose to pretty much build anything we wanted, including building something stupid. And we are deciding to build something complex. That's actually, I feel very grateful that we live in a time and place where we can do that. One last thought that I had about Cadbury, and I've been thinking a lot about it, is I feel when you look at from a macro perspective, the market of software, I think a lot of economics theorists, they keep talking about it's a sentence that I've read a little bit, which is the market is perfect or should be perfect, right? This place of goods and services where it's survival of the fittest, and the best service or software or product is the one that wins. I think barrier of entry, meaning making it harder and harder for people to use a piece of software, is what breaks that market perfection. So the market isn't perfect after all. Yeah. Now you have software solutions that are impossible to onboard. And in a weird psychological way, it's so hard and so expensive to onboard that is sunk cost fallacy. Mm-hmm. And so now you will never change again. And I'm really excited about what you guys are building, because I think it introduces a level of perfection in the market where, as you were saying before, you think the future is someone wants to use a piece of software and they just use it. Yeah. And that is really powerful, because that's not the case for 99% of enterprise software. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was great.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited we did. I mean, and I think that it's so timely. And thank you for taking the time to do this. I know this probably was the busiest week in a long, long time for you.
Yes.
I thought about titling this podcast "Fixing." Let me see if I wrote it well. "Fixing Enterprise Onboarding." Do you feel like that's a fair title, or do you think there's a better title for this episode?
I think that's totally appropriate. I would title it that. And I'll leave the audience with a fun note here, which is the origin story behind her name, Cadbury. A lot of people think it's the chocolate.
I did say that. Anyway.
It's actually there's a mid '90s movie called Richie Rich. It's with Macaulay Culkin. Guy
I
from
love
Home
that
Alone.
movie.
You've seen Richie Rich?
I've seen it like 35 times.
You know, it's IMDb ratings like 4.3, right?
Not fair. They don't get it.
And the butler in Richie Rich is named Cadbury, and so you know, in the spirit of assisting and helping our folks, that's where it came from. And our logo is a bow tie,
which, by the way, turns out to be probably one of the best movie butlers in movie history.
Yeah.
And he also has a love interest who is the mom of one of the other kids.
I actually don't remember that part. I kind of remember that.
Very short hints of like, there could be some chemistry here. But he also saves like the entire family.
That I remember. Best butler ever. Redefining the stereotypes that butlers get.
Much better than Alfred.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Manish. This was awesome and super excited about you guys are just getting started, which is exciting. We should repeat this in a few months because I know it's going to be a very different conversation. I'm sure you guys are going to learn so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Antonio.